Welcome back to Indigenous Talk. We are reviewing Reservation Dogs Season 3, Episode 3. We are joined by our guests.
Ian Allison, the host of Native Film Talk.
I'm Elias. I run the YouTube channel Native Media Theory.
Hey, all right. We will already say that this is a pretty heavy episode. Following episode contains depictions of Native boarding school abduction and abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. Episode starts off immediately with this warning. To be honest, I was kind of blindsided. I was like, oh, okay. We are telling the story.
We're going there.
Yeah,
where we are.
One quick thing too is we're going to try our best to navigate our review with trying to keep our respect with the topic and whatnot. Again, we are just sharing our opinions and reviewing the episode to our best ability. This episode is directed by Danis Goulet and written by Sterling Harjo. I got to do a quick apology. First episode review was also directed by Danis and I called her Danny Goulet, but I guess it's Danis. Episode is called Dear Lady. Episode starts, we get Dear Lady walking into the gas station right here. Before we hit the heavy stuff, I wanted to share something really quick that I found off of Reddit. Finally realized what Dear Lady's coat reminded me of. Boom. Sabretooth from X-Men.
Sabretooth. That is awesome.
You know, there are some similarities. Sabretooth, Dear Lady, attacking others.
Avenging people.
Let's continue. I thought this was really neat. I watched my episodes with the subtitles on as she's entering the gas station. We have right here the sound effect clopping because, I mean, this is Dear Lady. Goes into the restroom. To be honest, I don't know what the specific detail of this is.
I don't know. We're all Navajo, man. I don't know.
As she's going about trying to clean this antler or horn.
It's an antler, yeah. It's her weapon of choice.
You know what I think of when I see that? Have you ever seen Jeepers Creepers 2? When the creeper throws his bone at the bus and it hits and punctures the tire. That's what I thought. It looks like that to me. But I'm also, this isn't my culture, so I'm sure there's a story there that I haven't come across the significance of the antler itself.
So as she's going about cleaning, her weapon snaps, and then we get the first flashback or the first glimpse into what we might be looking at into this episode. See a door with a cross above it. See a young lady running. Next thing you know, she's driving. Dear Lady. As she's on her drive, that's when she has this flashback. We see that there's other Indigenous kids in the back of this truck, and at this point, they all kind of look tired,
somber,
uncertain.
I think it's interesting. We all kind of knew what was happening. I'm curious. I would like to hear the perspective of someone like a non-native person or even just people who don't know the history, what they were thinking. Because unfortunately, this is like the dread sunk in for me when I was watching this. I'm like, oh, this is going to be real. This is going to be really real.
I guess from our own Indigenous perspective, we already knew, hey, we are going to a boarding school. Good point, Ian. We kind of get the indication, hey, we're going to like a church. We're going to something that's involving religion. St. Nicholas Indian Trading School. If you're Indigenous, you kind of are most likely are aware of the Native boarding schools and the traumatic past that it holds within our history. Again, we know that it's going to be a pretty heavy episode. We see the nun come out, and then we had a fantastic choice right here, which I will get into. But also really quick, I know many other movies or TV shows will do this when they do like a little flashback. In this case, we actually change the aspect ratio. We get the full 16:9, and then when we go to the past, we are cropped in.
I missed that. Good job.
Right here is we hear the gibberish, and then even says it too in the subtitles, gibberish. And then when we switch perspectives, we actually understand them. Crazy, because imagine if you're in their perspective. This is exactly what it was like. They're just speaking English, but at that point, you don't know English. And so that's what you're hearing.
The audio is played backwards.
Oh, yes.
Like it sounds,
that's what I'm assuming.
It sounds like, it sounds really funky.
It was very powerful to see that because, I mean, we mentioned at the beginning of when we started, all of the other instances that we've seen of residential and boarding schools, but it's never really from the perspective of what is it like to be in the shoes of a kid going through this. And that gibberish that made it more terrifying. It made it more real.
Throughout the entire time here, the camera angle stays kid level for the most part. Like this angle right here, it's their level, more intimate into their perspective.
One of the connections is Charlie Brown. Like Charlie Brown, right, when they hear the adult, we don't understand the parents.
Oh, good grief.
One of the other connections could be, this is similar to how us Indigenous people hear our own language represented by Hollywood.
There's a lot of older John Ford films when they're speaking in Indigenous language, but they literally just had white person on the other end speaking, and then they reversed it.
Wow.
And then we actually get a really sad scene. I'm sure we'll get into it later, but man, episode really hit me and I cried quite a bit.
Yeah, here's where I really started crying because they really cut his hair off. I know on social media.
Yes.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. This scene that takes place, them cutting the young boy's hair, this actually did take place. And when I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, he actually did it for real. That was really powerful. We see the young girl. She's looking at the little boy getting his hair cut. And then we see Dear Lady playing with the hair. And so we think, oh, okay. This Dear Lady goes into the diner. Again, I mean, like I said before, sometimes I read a little too much into everything. So I was like, okay, decides to order 2 whole pies, apple pie and a cherry pie. Did you guys have any meaning? I don't know.
Not me.
Okay.
For the whole, yeah. I didn't understand that one.
Whole pie.
Why she would order whole pies.
There's a possible better connection I have later. When she said she wanted the whole pie, immediately made me think of Ron Swanson when he's like, bring me all the bacon you got on the back. Or he's like,
you don't understand.
You understand.
All of it.
I know what I'm about. We see Dear Lady is actually reading a poem book, and this is an actual Indigenous poem book, and Sterling Harjo shared this on his social media. And then we get our flashback again. And so at this point, we see now, okay, these are flashbacks. And also we notice these flashbacks kind of have a style to them. One thing I forgot to mention, we are dealing with this heavy topic. I thought it was very interesting that they really went with a 1970s horror style for this episode. You definitely feel the horror. You feel the tension.
Color grading, the change of aspect ratio, the score and the sound design, all of it lends for it to be tonally different and pretty much scary.
We hit the flashback, Dear Lady, just eating the food. Hey, what is this food? She immediately gets called out. And again, adding into that 1970s feel, one of the popular camera movements they did was the quick zoom. And I thought that was fantastic that we even have applied right here. The unnerving. She gets her face pushed into the food. And then we actually do see this little boy watching at this point. We find out later that his name is Coda. Coda goes over to Dear Lady, says, hey, that woman, stay away from her. Talk a little bit. And then that's when we're given our first warning of no one leaves unless you go to the cemetery.
They're having this whole conversation in Kiowa.
Yes.
Which was awesome.
Which Kiowa is an endangered language too. And then we hit perhaps the brightest part, the beacon of light that hopefully will stick with all of us in this episode. But remember, they can't stop you from smiling. And that's what we do. We smile. And then I like how he smiles at her and then he does the exact opposite. Just to make her laugh, just to make her smile.
Right. And it's just heart-wrenching when you're watching this, thinking that these are children. These are our grandparents, our parents, uncles and aunts, in Native communities that have gone through this exact thing. I was just so emotional throughout the entire episode because it's all I kept thinking about. Just my own family and my relatives having to find these coping mechanisms at such a young age. So a parallel to they can't stop you from smiling. That was something that my Che, so my mom's dad, we grew up in the same house. Breakfast with him every morning, dinner with him every morning. He's still alive. So he was really my second dad. He went to boarding school. He was taken from home. And when he was, I think, 9 or 10. He was taken from home, forcibly removed. He really had rightfully so, a jaded perception of the government. He would always tell us the government can take your land, your house, family, job, clothes right off your back, but they can never take what you know. And so he really stressed education in my house. That's why I attribute the fact that I have a bachelor's degree specifically because of him. Education and what he knew was the one thing that he could always fall back on and continue to persevere, continue to provide for his family.
Thought that was a fantastic thought that you shared.
Thank you.
We continue from here. The nuns come in. They grab one of the boys. They take him out. That's when we're shown the same scene that we saw earlier. And unfortunately, we just hear noises.
Which is scary because there's so many things that you can imagine is going on over there.
Right.
There's a lot that we know happened and there's a lot we don't know that happened. This scene and the one later just was really scary to me. There's a lot here too that I can talk about with my grandfather's. Get to that at the end.
We move to Dear Lady still reading her poetry book, and then we see Bear walking into the diner. One neat thing I saw that they did that I'm sure was on purpose was Bear is a gentleman. Immediately holds the door for the older lady. He calls her ma'am. He's looking for a charger to charge his phone. His phone is still dead. The waitress asks him, hey, do you want anything? And he goes, yes, please. Adds please in there. Adds thank you. He has a few other moments throughout the episode where he has the gentleman.
Well, yeah, he's been lost without without water and food for probably 2 or 3 days, he's still polite.
Hey.
It drives home the point of when comes up here soon.
Yeah,
She asks
exactly.
him, are you a good guy?
Dear Lady invites him over to sit with her. She offers him some pie. That's when she says, usually when I cross paths with someone, there's a reason. Bear is still kind of skittish. She doesn't really know what to think. And she intentionally drops the book. That's when we get the reveal to Bear. Bear sees that she is Dear Lady.
Those are hooves terrify me still, even though I know they're coming.
Yeah, that was actually pretty creepy. That was a creepy moment.
His first thought is, are you here to kill me? Then she tells him, you remind me of a boy I once knew.
At this point, I thought she was going to talk about Big, because Big is the only person that we have seen her have a prolonged conversation with.
We get a flashback. Nuns are about to come in. We get the warning from Coda. Don't look them in the eye when they are talking. And one of the boys is slouching. Dang. Yeah, that should have made me sit up straight too. He gets taken out of the room. And the nun grabs Dear Lady, looks her directly in the face, and still slaps her. Kind of like there's no winning in this situation.
Right. Just all about power.
We see the young native kids. Were they making their own garden or something? Or I was like,
yeah, I think they were just teaching them how to garden.
Yeah, that was a part of the government reform when they put us on reservations, wanted to separate us. And they also wanted us to adopt the yeoman farmer lifestyle. So I'm sure this is just further ingraining that mentality.
Get the warning right here. He's the one you must stay away from. He is the most evil. He is a wolf. There are many ways that we could interpret this to be of, oh, what does that mean? What did he do? So many things that we're aware that took place, and there's so many things that we're not aware that took place, which, yeah, that is heavy. We notice in the background there is a grave that's being digged. We get the juxtaposition of the native kids being forced to sing this song, Jesus Loves Me, this I know, right? I mean, we hear that a lot. At the same time, we see the grave being dug.
If you just look at the editing, we have the song, and then we have this, and then we immediately cut to the berries. And so all of that suggests death.
From our earlier response of like, oh, what do the pies mean? That's where I was like, okay, cherry has got to be blood. Again, I don't know, could be looking more into it, but it's like, okay, Dear Lady partaking in this blood because she's about to go on her own journey to seek vengeance.
And she kept telling Bear to eat pie. I don't know if he did or not. Why aren't you eating your pie? Why don't you eat your pie?
Bear then questions Dear Lady, starts talking to her. He's like, wow, you actually exist? What? I thought it was a story to keep all the uncles in line about Dear Lady, to scare them. She said, yeah, well, some uncles need more than stories.
Dang.
And we get this line right here. Come on, honey bunny, which is a reference to Pulp Fiction. That is this character in the background, Honey Bunny. We are in a diner, which looks very similar to this situation right here. Honey Bunny, she is like, okay, let's do this, yeah. And then also has the very soft, hesitant side.
I'm gonna go home.
Which could be just like Bear. Small reference. You see it?
There's a lot of influences in this.
We see Dear Lady and Bear. They drive to this ranch. As we pull up, we see it looks kind of nice, but also looks kind of deserted. She tells them, oh, you can wait in the truck. So you're not going to kill me? Wow. Dear Lady is real.
I think it just goes to showing how uncertain he thinks of who he really is. He thinks at times, like, am I really a good person? Am I really worthy of being spared by Dear Lady? When really he's one of the more genuine people in the entire show. He's trying to be a male figure in the house without knowing what a positive male figure looks like.
Continue from here. We get horror style type of zoom in as Dear Lady approaches the door. Dear Lady, she actually sheds a tear before she starts knocking. An old man opens the door. She immediately just looks him straight in the eyes. So we get the flashback, Coda being dragged out of his bed. This shot really got to me where we see Coda's perspective. Right. Again, maybe I read too much into things, but we see the cross, but it's upside down.
Yeah, definitely more akin to like an exorcism for sure than anything from that perspective.
One interesting thing is old guy, he just says, oh, hi, young lady. Who are you? He's like, hell, let me get you some water. And then first thing the old guy does is he turns his back to her, letting his guard down.
I read into it a little more. A wolf is like an apex predator. Like he doesn't fear anybody because he never is hunted, never in danger. Ooh. So why wouldn't you just let an absolute stranger into your domicile?
Ooh, that's pretty good. Next, we see Bear finally charges his phone, gets tons of messages. He's able to talk to his mom. And the old man, he says this profound line right here. When we pass on, pictures are all that we leave. Thank God we don't have pictures of everything. Ooh. Next, we see the wolf and the nuns carrying Coda away. The young Dear Lady runs after him. Hey, I'm out of here.
Could we go back real quick to that picture scene? What I really like about this and then the Jesus Love Me song is, to me, it's the non-native perspective when he's like, all we have is pictures to go off of. Whereas for us, it's like we've had the stories stories for generations. We've known about this forever. For him, he's like, well, thank God we don't got pictures of everything, because for the longest time until now we're doing this uncovering graves effort, there was a lot of disbelief that like, oh, like they weren't mistreated and there wasn't evidence of the actual mistreatment of Native people. So I love that they include the digging of the graves in this, because it's exactly what we're uncovering in real life to prove that these kids were taken forcibly and they were never sent home. And a lot of times there was never any notification. They just never showed up. Once again, so many layers to this episode. It was just phenomenal.
Real quick, as you are watching this episode, if you have any other meanings, any other interpretation that you see, feel free to share it with us in the comments.
Absolutely. Love to see that.
So, young deer lady running into the woods, feeling incredibly helpless, and then she comes across the deer. The deer says, oh, I can help you. We pretty much are seeing the origin of deer lady. We see the two other workers. They can't find her. Like, you know what? She'll probably die out here. Let's just go back. And to them, they don't care. We come across one of the nuns.
Throat was cut.
For the next part, we see two moments of the deer lady. She actually looks afraid, and then as she gets closer to him, she looks a lot more determined. We get the flashback of her and Coda. Song plays in the background, and then she goes in for the kill. She does have that moment where she looks helpless, similar to the Honey Bunny reference, a person masking their deep feelings. Deer lady is finally able to take out the man who ruined her life
and the lives of probably a dozen other kids.
Countless others.
It's interesting, like right before she kills him, he's kind of saying these things that would make you feel bad for him. I was a horrible father. I drank a lot. I wasn't a good person. In any other circumstance, you feel sorry for this guy. But the thing is, it's just like, I don't think any of that compares to what he did to these children. She knows this. There's a lot of parallels. I think a lot of women can kind of give insight to this specific type of situation with confronting your abuser.
All the things that he's talking about, those were all choices. These children had no choice. They were forcibly removed. Culture, language, identity stripped from them. While he has regrets about his life, they were all individual actions.
She goes in to attack him. She does not blink once. Fully locked in, takes him out.
You get the eeriness of the song singing in the background. I'm going to teach you guys a new word. It's called contrapuntal music.
Here it goes.
I didn't make that one up.
Here it goes again.
Okay. This song is very representative of how Christianity is viewed in Native communities. There's a lot of turmoil where some people lean in heavy, can look past some of the atrocities or don't really acknowledge them. And then there are others who refuse it completely because of all of this. Even within our Native communities, we're split. Once again, just something else that just I think sheds light on that this episode's phenomenal.
She takes out the wolf, and again, the horror themes. In a way, she is the final girl. There's always a final girl, one who lives to tell the tale, one who comes out on top.
There's a tiny detail of when she's walking away, you see the hoof print covered in blood on the floor. Good. Pretty interesting. And obviously after this, we get the zoom in of the photo. It's him, obviously.
We get confirmation this is the wolf.
A bit of a Shining reference there, I think.
Yeah, it was. It was. That was a good one.
From here, Bear and Dear Lady, they head back to Okern, Oklahoma. Bear is a gentleman. He's like, hey, thank you. He shakes her hand. She's like, hey, did you kill somebody? And she says, I killed a human wolf. There was a fun little quote. Jude Barnett, a human wolf could never be a res dog. Ooh. They should have put that in the script. That's
for real. Bars.
Ooh. We go from here, a character building moment, and don't worry about you becoming your dad. Your mom made sure of that. You're gonna be okay.
I'm really curious to see if this is the last that we see of her. I see some clamoring of, we need to have a Dear Lady spinoff. I completely support that, because that whole timeline is very interesting.
She passes on to Bear, and remember to keep smiling. They can't stop you from smiling.
That's the part that got me hard.
Again, Bear being a gentleman. Adieu. We quickly see Mose and Miko. They're joking, right? Yo, Bear, is that your new girl? And then they tell them, oh no, that's Dear Lady. They don't even question it. They're like, oh yeah, dang, we should have gave him a CD.
I love that.
We get a quick flashback. You know what I was thinking about today? Going fishing. Will you come with me? And immediately she says yes. Coda smiles. See Dear Lady retreat back into the woods. And then we are hit with, oh man,
Ugh.
this heavy final scene.
This one hit me. I had hoped she was going to be like driving down this dirt road to a pond and meeting Coda as an old man.
I was hoping we would see a connection to the fishing. Unfortunately, yes, we see right here. We zoom in to the headstone of Coda Littlebird killed by human wolves. Dang, I just started crying. Even after this, I kind of like took a little break, gather my thoughts and everything. I have some extra that I wanted to ask you guys. After I go through my thoughts, I want to go through Ian and Elias and see what you both have picked up like overall. So if we happen to have some non-natives watching this who know very little about the native boarding schools, I have a quote from Dennis Goulet from Hollywood Reporter. We really wanted to draw the audience into their perspective. How would it feel if you were a child that was suddenly taken away from your parents? You don't even know where you're going and why. You don't speak the language. You don't understand what's happening to you. From the get-go, you're being spoken to in a different way, in a language you don't understand. And the violence is a casual, everyday, and done without a thought.
I mean, I think people just write off natives with a bunch of stereotypes like poor, drug addiction, suicide rates are through the roof. But really, this speaks to like the generational trauma that gets passed down, and it's very recent. I mean, we have living relatives that went through this, and so the generational trauma is still being passed down right now, and it will continue to be. You can't have a generation of youth go through this traumatic experience and expect them to turn out to be fully formed adults without baggage, especially with poor access to mental health care and the stigmas around that. There's just so many things that you can glean as a non-native person looking at, like, it helps you better understand how complex native communities are.
And the other thing is to remember is that some of the very last boarding schools were open, I think, until the 80s or even the 90s.
Right.
This is something that's happened to many people in the generation of our parents and our grandparents. There's people living now who went through this.
Yeah. All four of my grandparents, all stripped from home.
Yep, my grandfather.
From here, Tasba Chavez, who's also one of the main creatives on Reservation Dogs and directed the last episode, she put this on her story. When I first saw our background actors come onto set, myself and many others broke into tears, imagining our parents, grandparents, and so on at that age being taken from their families and put into the government-run boarding schools. The impact left generations of language and cultural loss, displacement, and trauma.
Something I didn't even think to talk about, but is ever present in all of our communities is the language loss. I mean, because of this experience, we saw it. You were vilified, you were disciplined, you are made to be less than by speaking your language. And so this is an ESL problem, English as a second language. When it comes time for our grandparents and parents to teach us, like, well, I don't want them to go through anything like that at all. Just teach them English only. I don't ever want our language to be held used as a barrier.
It's very similar to what a lot of children of immigrants go through when they come to America, where
very much so
they're encouraged to speak English only so that they can have an advantage in this country. Sometimes they're not taught Spanish or any other language for that matter completely. That causes a kind of a diaspora for those kids, the second generation, where they're kind of like, I only grew up speaking English because my parents told me to, but at the same time may or may not be vilified by your own people for not speaking your traditional language. A lot of native people go through that to this day even. I mean, I've been through that growing up.
I mean, which is interesting because we know now what we know about language learning. You can be multilingual with 4 or 5, 6 languages at the same time, have no educational barriers. It won't do anything because you're not learning it when you're fully formed. And it's really a shame that something like boarding schools could just wipe out an entire generation of native speakers in such a short time.
So I have 2 questions for y'all. We never actually saw Coda break a rule, right? I feel like he was obedient the entire time, and then all of a sudden, boom, which I guess just...
Well, yeah, because it's suggested earlier they're taking out some random kids for whatever reason. It's never explained. Again, we're looking at it from the perspective of the kids, so they don't know. Therefore, we don't know, because that's exactly what happened to my grandpa. He told me about one student who acted out and he never came back. They don't know where he went. And this is here in Utah. He doesn't know. No one knows. And so that just shows, I guess, again, one, we're seeing the perspective of the kids, but 2, it's also just showing kind of the ridiculousness of the discipline.
I agree with Elias. I think that he didn't necessarily do anything egregious. I bet he just assumed a leadership role within that small community and just wanted to cut the head off and kill whatever hope that everyone had, which is really messed up when you're talking about children. I mean, children, literally children.
Is there anything else that popped up that you want to speak about?
It really broke my heart to think about all of our relatives that didn't come home, like our relatives that we never got a chance to meet. What extended family would we have had we not had residential schools? And we still don't know the number of kids that were killed, that died away from home. And so there still is that search of trying to reconnect as we uncover more graves, to reconnect these people to their actual ancestral homelands or their communities. I think it's good for awareness, good for visibility, and just to honor their memory, to respect sacrifices and the perseverance, endurance that they went through. Like, gosh, I don't really have anything else to say. It's just a great episode.
I have two things. One is about Dear Lady, and the other one's about residential schools. The moment where she kills the wolf, in my opinion, that wasn't the deer woman. It was her, like who she was before Dear Lady killing him. This one was the hardest.
Is this also the first on-screen murder for her?
Yeah,
all the other murders that she has
of,
are all...
Oh yeah,
we've only seen the aftermath, like in the first season when she killed those two racist guys. And obviously the second thing is about boarding school system. Like I mentioned, my grandfather, he was forced to go to Intermountain Indian School in Brigham City, just like, I don't know, an hour and a half north of me from here. Yeah, he has tons of stories. And this is interesting about that school, and this is the nuance of the residential schools. I've talked to some Navajo, and I think it depends on the boarding school they went to, where they were like, yeah, it was tough, it was hard, but like I was able to get a job. You know, my grandfather's kind of like that, where he went in, I think in the 50s, but then ironically, he was able to get like really good jobs out of there. But a lot of the stuff that happened and went down there, he doesn't really talk about. There's a lot of intense trauma that he went through that I know for a fact that like he doesn't swim. He doesn't ever take his shirt off. They like forced all the kids to like swim naked and other stuff he doesn't talk about. He talks about how one of the nuns would smack him on the side of the ear till they bled. There's stuff like that. These are small things, and there's a lot he probably doesn't want to talk about, and he's still alive. You know, this was in the 50s. For a lot of Native people, their experiences obviously weren't the same, but there definitely was a lot of abuse. I don't think you can quantify the abuse. Yeah, it was a heavy episode, but I will say this, what she said to Bear, quoting Coda about smiling, like they can't stop us from smiling. It reminds me of
John Trudell.
Activist. Yeah, John Trudell's quote about saying that like they have to kill us because they can't destroy our spirit.
Yeah.
It's that same thing. I think it's going to be cathartic for a lot of people, and it's going to educate a lot of non-natives to get an insight from a perspective of what happened there and everything. And looking at it through the eyes of Dear Lady, I thought was a very smart choice, because she is the embodiment of justice. You know, at least in this rendition, I think a lot of people, a lot of natives who suffered abuse, I think they would like to have that catharsis, but they can't. This was a good way of exploring that in a narrative way.
That's a great point, because these people were never tried. They were never convicted. There was nothing. There was no justice for a lot of these people. So I never even thought of that, Elias, that this is cathartic for them.
Yeah, it's a chapter in U.S. history that doesn't get talked about enough. The whole mandate of kill the Indians, save the man.
Okay, but with that, thank you everybody. We will see you all at the next episode review.